What if one of history's greatest minds didn't just advise a conqueror, but became one himself? In our timeline, Aristotle shaped Alexander the Great through philosophy and reason. But tonight, we explore a world where the teacher never lets go of the student, where the philosopher-king described in Plato's Republic becomes terrifyingly real, and where an empire built on logic reshapes civilization forever. Picture the year 336 BC. Philip II of lies dead, murdered by his own bodyguard in the theater act. His son Alexander, barely 20 years old, stands over his father's corpse while the court erupts into chaos. Nobles whisper of conspiracy. Rivals sharpen their knives in the shadows. The Macedonian throne, that brutal seat of power carved from mountain kingdoms and Greek ambition, teeters on the edge of collapse. In our world, Alexander seized control within days. His decisiveness, his ruthlessness, the fire his father had stoked and Aristotle had tried to temper, it all exploded into action. He murdered his rivals, secured the loyalty of the army, and launched himself into immortality. But what if, in those crucial hours after Philip's assassination, the young king hesitated? What if grief and uncertainty clouded the mind that would have conquered Persia? What if Aristotle, who had tutored Alexander for 3 years who had filled the prince's head with Homer and biology, ethics and empire, saw his brilliant student faltering, and stepped forward not with advice, but with action? Imagine Aristotle, 50 years old, standing in the palace as Macedonia threatens to tear itself apart. He's no warrior. His hands have held scrolls, not swords, but he understands power in a way few men ever could. He studied it, dissected it, categorized it like one of his biological specimens. He knows that in this moment, philosophy must become practice, or everything Philip built, everything Alexander could become, will drown in blood. And so the philosopher makes a choice that will haunt history. He doesn't seize the throne himself. That would be suicide. The Macedonian nobles would never accept a Greek intellectual as their king. Instead, Aristotle does something far more cunning. He becomes Alexander's regent, his voice, his will made manifest. When Alexander, paralyzed by the weight of the crown and the ghosts of his father's enemies, cannot act, Aristotle acts for him. Orders flow in Alexander's name, but they carry Aristotle's logic. Executions are carried out with systematic precision, not in rage but according to reason. Each death serves a purpose. Each purge strengthens the state. The court is horrified. The army, however, obeys. Because Aristotle doesn't just give orders, he convinces. He speaks to the generals in language they understand, wrapping necessity in honor, clothing political murder in the robes of duty and loyalty. This is what Plato never understood Aristotle thinks as he signs death warrants in the young king's name. Philosophy without power is mere dreaming, but power guided by philosophy, that can reshape the world. Within a year, something unprecedented emerges. Alexander remains king in name, but he rules as Aristotle's instrument. The young conqueror who might have burned across Asia in a fever of glory instead becomes the executor of a grand philosophical experiment. When they march against Persia in 334 BC, they don't just march to conquer, they march to order. The Persian Empire, that vast, sprawling giant that has dominated the East for 2 centuries, expects another barbarian invasion. They've seen conquerors before. They know how to absorb them, how to wait them out, how to let the vastness of their empire swallow ambition whole. But Aristotle isn't like other conquerors. He doesn't want tribute. He wants transformation. After the battles of and after the sieges and the surrenders, Aristotle begins his great work. He establishes not just military garrisons but academies, temples to learning modeled after his Lyceum in Athens. He demands that local governors, Persian and Greek alike, study natural philosophy, ethics, and logic. The empire, he declares, will be ruled not by the whims of kings but by the principles of reason. It's breathtaking in its ambition. It's also terrifying in its coldness. Because Aristotle's reason has sharp edges. He categorizes peoples as he once categorized animals, natural rulers and natural slaves, civilized and barbarian, rational and irrational. The Persians, the Egyptians, the peoples of the East, they can be elevated, he believes, but only through proper education, proper governance, proper order. Those who resist this enlightenment, they're obstacles to progress, to be removed with the same dispassion a gardener pulls weeds. Alexander, the young king who might have loved glory and adventure, becomes something stranger, a philosopher in armor, mouthing Aristotle's words even as he stands on battlefields slick with blood. Some say he's brilliant. Others whisper he's broken, a puppet dancing on strings of syllogism and logic. When he looks in the mirror, does he see a king or a student who never graduated? By 325 BC, the empire stretches from Greece to India, but it's not like any empire before it. Aristotle has created a vast machine of governance, where administrators trained in his methods implement policies designed to maximize human flourishing, as he defines it. Slavery is systematized, made more efficient. Women are confined to roles Aristotle deems natural. Democracy, that great Greek experiment, is dismissed as rule by the unqualified. Instead, a hierarchy of merit rises, based on education and adherence to philosophical principles. It works. Gods help us, it works. Trade flourishes under predictable laws. Scientific knowledge spreads through the academies. Agricultural reforms feed millions. The library at Alexandria in this world, founded a decade earlier, becomes the greatest repository of human knowledge the world has ever seen. Mathematics, medicine, astronomy, they advance by generations in mere decades. But the cost weighs heavy on the soul of civilization. There's no room for mystery in Aristotle's empire, no space for the irrational, the mystical, the divine madness that once drove Greek tragedy and Persian poetry. The Zoroastrian priests who won't submit to logical analysis are exiled. The Egyptian temples that won't open their mysteries to systematic study are shuttered. Even the worship of the Greek gods becomes formalized, ritualized, stripped of ecstasy, and reduced to civic duty. This is the dream of the philosopher-king made real, and it's both magnificent and monstrous. When Aristotle dies in 322 BC, he leaves behind an empire that has never known his equal. Alexander, now 40 years old and still king in name, finally steps out of his teacher's shadow. But the habits are too deeply ingrained. He continues the system because it's all he knows. The empire Aristotle built outlasts them both, spreading its rational tentacles across the known world, absorbing Rome before Rome can rise, sending expeditions of scholar soldiers to chart and categorize and conquer in the name of knowledge. By the time of Christ, in a world where Christianity would struggle to find purchase in an empire built on reason rather than faith, Aristotle's grand experiment has remade civilization. There are no dark ages in this timeline because learning never stops. But there's also no Renaissance because there was never a classical age to rediscover. Progress is constant, measured, controlled. Is humanity better off? The scholars debate it in the academies. Infant mortality is lower. Literacy is higher. The mechanisms of the world are better understood. But something vital has been lost. The wild, unpredictable spark of human creativity that flourishes not in spite of chaos, but because of it. This is the world that emerges when philosophy doesn't just advise power, but becomes it. When the life of the mind joins with the sword of conquest. When one man's vision of the good life becomes an empire's mandatory curriculum. In the end, Aristotle's empire stands as humanity's greatest achievement and its most cautionary tale. Because power, even when wielded by the wise, even when guided by reason and learning and the best intentions philosophy can muster, still demands its price in blood and freedom and all those messy, irrational things that make us human. The teacher shaped the student conquered the world, and the world learned that enlightenment, when it comes at the point of a spear, is still just another form of tyranny, merely better organized, more thoroughly justified, and infinitely harder to resist. Perhaps Alexander the Great was never meant to be great because of reason. Perhaps he was meant to be great because he was beautifully, terribly human, ambitious and flawed and burning with passions that no philosophy could contain. And perhaps that's the real lesson here, written across the centuries in the blood of empires, that the dreams of philosophers, when made real, can reshape the world, but they can never quite reshape the human heart.